英語脳を作るならリスニングをするな。このメッセージの真意は、まずはを最優先で強化しよう。それができればは自然と強化される。
Of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself.
はい、こんにちは。どんな英語長文もロジックで解決、瞬殺英語のスナイパーKENです。今回はですね、英語脳を作るならリスニングするなというね動画です。取り上げるのは有名なスティーブ・ジョブズのスタンフォード大学卒業式のスピーチ完全版をお届けします。このスピーチはですね、前編、中編、後編としてより詳しい動画も作っているので、こちらの方もねぜひ楽しんでいただければと思います。さて、皆さんの中で英語脳を作るイメージってどんなものですか？英語脳は作ってみたいけど、この動画本当かなとかって思いません？そういう風にね思ったね、皆さんに驚いてねもらうためのね動画なんですよね。KENのところにはよく問い合わせが来ます。リーディング、リスニング、スピーキング、ライティングを含めた英語の総合力を上げるにはどうしたらいいのかと、英語をペラペラ話すにはどうしたらいいですかと。皆さん本当にね学習意欲高いんですよ。そんな皆さんに目的の達成のためには英会話スクールに行こう、気合でリーディング、リスニング、スピーキング、ライティング全てね時間かけて練習しようと行動されてるんではないでしょうか。一般論から言えば、英語脳を作るためにはリーディング、リスニング、スピーキング、ライティングなどまんべんなく強化して英語の総合力を高めていく必要がありそうですよね。ですが実際のところで英語脳を作るためにはまんべんなく能力を高める必要はないんです。KENの元に来てくれる受講生は英会話スクールに何年も通ってるのに英語脳が作れてる感じがしない。英語を聞き流してリスニングを強化してるんですけれども、英語脳は作られてる気がしない。受講生も様々な勉強をねされてるようなんですけれども、英語脳は作られてない感じなんです。そもそも英語脳って何なんでしょうか？英語脳は耳にした英語の音や文字を日本語を介さずに英語を英語のままイメージや感覚で捉えて英語で理解できる状態のこと。皆さんもいろいろ勉強してきたものの英語の状態になってないと感じた経験ないですか？私もですね、大学時代に某1000時間ぐらい聞くマラソンっていうのを聞いてたんですけれども、本当に3時間聞いたんですけど、新しい教材だとなかなかきちっと聞き取れないということがね頻発しました。英語脳は作りたいけれどもどうすればよいかわからないと感じる方がね多いと思います。ですが英語脳を作ることができると、英語を日本語にすることなく英語のまま英語で理解することができるんです。昇進、スキルアップ、転職、就活、圧倒的に優位に立てると思いませんか？もしKENがこの方法を見出せなかったら、これまで航空エンジニアとしてボーイング社との交渉、ウォール・ストリート・ジャーナルのね東京支局長との対談、これは独立してからなんですけど、こういった機会は得られなかったでしょう。でもこの動画で紹介することを徹底すると、英語を順番に区切って前から順番にね理解できるので、脳の中にどんどん情報がね入ってくるんです。そういった感想をねいただいてます。海外からアメリカ人上司がやってきてスムーズに話せた、はっきりと理解できて、あっと思った瞬間が何度もあった。しかも読む、書く、聞く、話すの全てにおいてです。こういった感想や英語に対する恐怖感が薄れ、私の英会話の先生にも話しやすそうねって言われましたと、こういったですね変化を感じられます。それどころか、英語学習者なら一度は憧れる同時通訳者のような英語処理思考が自然と身についてしまうんです。これこそまさに英語脳ですよね。先ほどの実例は全てKENの講座の受講生の体験談です。これまで2600人以上の受講生が成果を出しているので、効果は実証済みです。ぜひ今回紹介する方法を自分のものとして英語脳を作っていきましょう。今回紹介する英語脳を作る方法以外にも、失敗しない英語学習法を紹介する動画も公開しています。そういった動画をこれからも見逃したくない人は、今のうちにチャンネル登録をしておいていただければと思います。さらに LINE では皆様の英語脳作りをサポートするオンライン無料診断も受け付けていますので、ぜひ LINE 登録をよろしくお願いします。さて、タイトルの英語脳を作るならリスニングするな、結論はまず英語を正確に読むためのリーディング力の強化を図ること。なぜならば、書かれている英語をそのスピードで正確に理解できなければ、英語を聞くこと、話すこと、書くことはできないからなんです。それができないと、先ほどの英語脳の定義、英語の音は耳にした英語の音や文字を日本語を介さずに英語のままのイメージや感覚で捉え、英語で理解できてしまう状態、この状態を作ることはできないんです。英語を正確に読めたところでリスニング力やスピーキング力が上がらないと思いますよね。リーディング力とリスニング力、別物だと多くの方が思っているかもしれませんが、実は密接な関係があります。例えばジョブズのスピーチを聞いてスッとわからないときは、英語の書き起こしをですね、その喋ってるスピードで読んでもスッと読めません。試しにジョブズのスピーチをですね、書き起こしなしと書き起こしありで聞いてみましょう。どうぞ。
Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose.
次は書き起こしありですね。どうぞ。
Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose.
どうでしたか？英文自体は難しいものではないんですけれども、聞き取りや読解も苦労されたんじゃないですかね。スピーチやビジネス英会話は書き言葉がベースなんです。スッと聞けない人は読むときに繰り返し乖離読みをしてます。読むときは時間をかけて文章をひっくり返して理解することができるんですけれども、音は発せられるとすぐに消えてしまって次の音がやってくるので、ひっくり返してね、考える時間的な余裕がないんです。だからスピーチや会議の会話を理解するときに、リスニングの際もですね、前から読み下しをしていくリーディングの練習がね、役に立つんですよ。話す人のスピードに合わせて前から順番に英語の語順で理解することができれば全部わかります。前から順番に理解することのサポートとしてケンはですね、英文を色分けして整理することをお勧めしているんです。これは役割によって色分けしていくんです。先ほどのスピーチをですね、修飾している部分は青色、接続詞は赤色で色分けしてみましょう。どうぞ。
Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose.
1回目の動画に比べて分かりやすくなってませんか？一見関係なさそうなリスニング力、スピーキング力も土台はリーディング力、つまり読解力が必要なんですよ。リスニング力はリーディング力と密接な関係があり、正確に発音を聞き分ける力と素早く英文を理解するリーディング力の掛け算で成立していると考えることができます。ここまでできればライティング、スピーキングもね、怖くないんですよね。それではですね、ジブツのスピーチをね、聞いてみましょう。どうぞ。
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking Don't settle. My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now. This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
ジョブズのスピーチいかがでしたか？英語脳を作るならリスニングをするな。このメッセージの真意は、英語脳を作りたいならまずはリーディング力を最優先で強化しよう。それができればリスニング力は自然と強化されるということなんです。ケンが提唱する英語脳の作り方のステップはたったの3つです。英語を素早く理解するためのこの役割の見える化、色分けです。そして日本語を介さずに英語の順番のまま理解していく。そして大量読みをせず前から順番に翻訳して理解していく。ここまで動画を見てくれた方は英語脳が欲しいと真剣に考えている方だと思います。今回紹介した方法を実践してもらえば大丈夫です。根性論や精神論に頼らず成功確率の高い方法で英語脳を作ることができます。覚えてほしいことは一つですね。英語脳を作りたいなら真っ先にリーディング力の強化です。正確に高速で英語を理解していく力を習得していきましょう。なぜなら長文読解もリスニングも前から順番に理解することができればはっきりとハイスピードで全部分かるからです。スピーチやビジネス成果や書き言葉がベースなのでまずは読解力が必要です。読むときは時間をかけて文章をひっくり返して理解できますが、音は発せられるとすぐに消えてしまって次の音がやってくるのでひっくり返して考える時間的な余裕がありません。なのでまずは基本となる読解力を強化することで自然とリスニング力も向上し、ライティングスピーキングを含む総合的な英語力向上、つまりは英語脳の獲得につながっていくんです。ケンは根性論ではない理系的ロジックで英語長文をサクサク読めるという英語脳育成の前提となる講座を開催しており、これまで2600人以上の人が受講しています。4大特典もあるので興味があれば概要欄から LINE 登録してみてください。ということで今回も最後まで見てくれてありがとうございました。この動画が少しでもためになったと思ってくれた方はですね、ぜひいいねボタン、コメント欄に感想をいただければ嬉しいです。そして通知ボタンもオンにしていただけるとですね、次の動画すぐに見られることができます。それではまた次回の動画でお会いしましょう。バイバーイ。